Okay, today we're going to use our Drink Can Tinwork skills to try to make a new design of Putt Putt boat engine. So I've got a bunch of tin cans here that are in my sort of collection. I just picked these up on the side of the road and washed them out and then cut them into pieces of sheet aluminium. And I'm going to use these today to try to make a different design of engine for what's called a Putt Putt boat. Now, a Putt Putt boat is a little thing that runs on a candle. It's like a pulse jet that runs on a candle. Anyway, let's see if we can do something with these. So I'm going to start with this, and we're going to try to make a chamber and the pipes for our Putt Putt boat. So we're just going to tape this down here to the back. This is the cork back of a table mat. Now, I still find that this is the best material for doing this tin work because the cork's just got a little bit of give to it, and so when we emboss it with the ballpoint pen we will get a little bit of indentation because of the give of the cork. Anyway, let's inscribe a couple of lines. So we're going to have a chamber here, and then we're going to have pipes going off it. So I'm pressing reasonably hard because I want to emboss a line in the metal, and I'm trying to make smooth continuous strokes, so we'll also have one about here. Okay. And just there. Okay. Now the next thing we need to do is make a kind of chamber, which is going to just be an indentation in the metal right here. So we'll start with a circle and a larger circle. We'll just keep on going like that until we get to the edges and it joins onto these bits, which are going to be the pipes. Okay, so that's more or less joined on. So I'm just going to add some extra lines there. So what we're going to do now is use the rounded side of these scissors, and we're just going to press down into there to try to make into almost like a bowl. We'll work on that a little bit more when we've got it free and we can pick it up. But yeah, for now we're just making a dent in there. Okay, time to take the tape off. We'll see if we can save that because I might reuse it for when we stick it down the other way. Okay, and then we're going to turn that over, and then just either side of those embossed lines there, we're going to emboss one the other direction. And there is a reason for this. We'll do the same on that side. And the same on the inside of these lines here as well. Okay, so what we've done here is to create two shallow channels, and I'm going to deepen those now with, again, the rounded edge of the scissors. Okay, so we've got, two definite channels there. And then it's just a case of trying to emboss this shape here deeper and deeper until we've got a proper little dent. And what I think I will now do is I'm just going to inscribe a line around the outside of that chamber, just from this side, so that we end up, well, you'll see what this is for in a moment. Okay, so that's to define the edge of that little chamber there. I think we've actually done pretty good there. The other thing I'm just going to do here now is ease these together to make a slightly deeper channel, but it doesn't have to be very deep. Like that. Okay. Right, I think we're not far off now. So what I'm now going to do is cut that out, and I'm going to leave a flange on the edge of about 1 centimetre width for now. I'm going to trim it down later a bit further. Okay, and I'm going to cut across here. So what I've now got is an embossed piece of metal that hopefully, when I glue it to a flat piece of metal, it will have a little chamber here connected with 2 thin tubes to the outside world. So, just need to pick another piece of metal. Okay, so we're going to pick a piece of aluminium here, and just need to cut that to the right size to mate with this piece here. Okay, so we've got our 2 pieces of metal. I'm just going to key them up. We've got a tiny piece of abrasive here. I'm just going to rough up the flat parts of the flanges there. And we're going to use that and that will just help the glue that we're going to use to adhere a little bit better. Now we're going to use 2-part epoxy. This is just a cheap tube of 2-part epoxy that I got from Poundland. Thorough mixing of epoxy, because this is the place it goes wrong. If you don't mix thoroughly, you don't get a good bond, or you get patches of stickiness, uncured resin in your mix. So we need to give this a good mix, although we've only got a 5-minute working time for this resin, so we also need to be quick. I am going to use just the thinnest of smears here because I don't want this blobbing into the channels and blocking them, so I am literally just going to give it a thin smear of glue, because the thinner you go here, the stronger the bond. Really, we don't want excess amounts of glue squeezing out or forming voids. So yeah, I've mixed up far too much glue here, but more than I need. But I guess that's better than not enough. So now let's get that top part on there like that, and then start clamping. I'm just going to use these little clamps because they reach over the edge of that tube into the middle. Let's use that big one there for the first bit. Okay, and then I've got a bunch of very small clamps that I can use to go all the way around the edge here and make sure that is clamped shut. Okay, now these small clamps don't seem to exert quite enough force on the edges, so what I'm going to do is augment them with a bit of extra thickness. That's good. That's giving them a real pinch on the material. It may or may not work. Only time will tell. So we'll leave that to set up. We can see that glue has already started to stiffen. So we're going to leave that to set up completely, and then we can take the clamps off, and then we can test for water tightness. Okay, it's been probably half an hour, and the glue has definitely set on the bit that I left over. So we can be confident that it should have set inside our workpiece as well. So let's see what we got. Okay, so if this has worked, I should be able to blow down that hole and feel air blowing back up that hole. Well, yeah, I can, but also we've got a leak. I think we've got a leak here, and we've got a leak there, and indeed there. Oh well. Okay, I'm going to try that again and see if we can get it right. Okay, so let's see if we've done any better this time. The glue is definitely set. Okay, it looks pretty sealed up along the edges. So I'm just going to give this a little trim now. Just really to tidy it up. Now, this works by being asymmetric. So actually what we need to do is trim one of these shorter than the other. And actually I need to trim them so that they are able to go into the water without too much resistance. So I'm going to trim down to there and cut a V up to about there. And I'm going to cut one of these slightly shorter than the other, and there's a reason for that. the asymmetry is necessary for this to work properly. And I'll explain why in a diagram, if indeed it does work properly. Right, let's go and make a little boat that we can fit this onto, and then we'll give it a test. Now, we could use our Drink Can Tinwork skills to make a little tin boat, and I may indeed do that, but just to get this tested quickly, we're going to make about our foam, because it can be guaranteed to float. And let's actually just find out if this thing works at all. Okay, that looks about right. And we're going to have the nozzles down there so they go in the water. Candle just about fits underneath there and heats that little chamber there. So, just a little bit of tape, I think, to secure that and stop it from slipping. Good. I think, well, it's got a chance of working, hasn't it? Okay, so here we go. So let's just make sure it does actually float the right way up. Yeah, that's good. The nozzles are under the water as well. So I'll just take the candle out for the moment. And what I do need to do now, I've got this plastic pipette. I'm just going to fill up the engine with water. So just going to prime it. And I'll just fill it up until I see water come out of the other nozzle. That's good. What's particularly good here is when I push in here, you can see water squirts out of the other nozzle. That's particularly encouraging because it hopefully means there aren't any leaks. Now we'll light the tea light candle. Just slide that gently in underneath the engine. And there we wait. Yeah, I'm going to try it with just a different tea light with a slightly higher flame. That one is just too weedy. So let's try it with this one. Oh, something's happening. Yes, I can see pulsing happening at the back of the boat there. And there we go. It's not made a pop-pop sound yet, but we've got a pulsing action happening at the back of the boat there that's driving it along. I'm going to get the camera down here so we can have a really close look. And you can see the water there. It's just pulsing gently in and out of that engine. So yeah, we're not getting the classic pop-pop sound that you get if you make these out of a larger piece of tin and make the chamber in such a way that it can pop, and it's got like a clicker action, but we have got a functioning pulse jet there. So there we go. That is an engine with no moving parts. Now, I did say I was going to explain how these Putt Putt boats work by means of a diagram. Let's have a go at doing that. So there are a couple of things I'd like to explain here, but first off, let's explain what we mean by blowing and sucking. As you probably know, there is no such thing as suction. So when you've got a tube and there's pressure inside the tube is greater than the pressure outside of the tube, the fluid inside the tube will tend to blow out. When that situation is reversed and you've got greater pressure outside the tube than inside the tube, the fluid outside the tube will tend to be pushed inside the tube. Now, we quite commonly call this sucking, but in fact it's just another kind of blowing. And so what's happening here is when you suck on a straw in your drink, you're not actually sucking the water up the straw. What you're doing is lowering the pressure inside the straw, and then the higher pressure environment is pushing the water into the end of the straw and up into your mouth. Anyway, but I'm going to use the words blow and suck in this explanation. Just understand that's what we're talking about here. If you're a pedant, then please understand I did explain that. Right, so anyway, so in these Putt Putt boats, we've got two tubes which are different lengths, and they are joined to a chamber. And that chamber's full of water. In fact, the whole thing's full of water, so I won't draw the water. So, and then we apply heat underneath here. And what happens when you apply heat is the water inside this chamber boils, and it comes to a point where suddenly a bubble of steam is produced. And that bubble of steam causes expansion in here, and that drives water out of both of the tubes. So that creates pressure in here, and water comes out of both of these tubes here. That expanding bubble of steam generates a bit of turbulence in here, which typically brings a bit of colder water back in contact with the metal, which will cause that bubble to contract again and lower the pressure in here. And then we get water flowing back the other way into the tubes, like so. And that motion will tend to oscillate back and forth. So you'll have the bubble will be expanding and contracting rapidly, and that's what causes the pop pop sound. You could just about hear it on my model. It was like a very gentle sort of shushing repetitive sound, and you could definitely see it in the pulsing motion of the water coming out the end. Now, the fact that these two nozzles here are different lengths works to our advantage, because what happens here is the water's driven out, and then when it's drawn back in, there's a bit of an asymmetry here, a bit of an imbalance in the flow of water back into the chamber, and that will tend to set up a general net circulation. So whilst water is being driven out of both and drawn back into both, what tends to happen is it's more so at the top than it is at the bottom. And so there's a general net flow of water that comes into the chamber and then goes back out the top, or back out the longer leg. So then that generates a stable setup here, because you can imagine if that didn't happen, if you didn't have circulation of fresh water coming in all the time, what might happen here is that the chamber might boil dry. The candle flame might just boil that dry, turn it all into steam, drive the water out, and then the whole thing would just stop functioning. But what actually happens is you get a kind of circulation of water through the system, and that generates a steady state of expansion of little bubbles, contraction, water driven through, and an ongoing state of pulse motion. So anyway, the question you might be asking at this point is, if there's just water going in and out of the same tube, oscillating, I mean there's no water actually being permanently driven out of here, it's being replaced by more water. So we've got net zero flow. So how is it that water coming out in and out of these same nozzles here will just tend to actually generate a forward motion? You'd think that if it was coming out and then going back in, those things would balance out over time and you'd end up with no net thrust. And that's to do with the way that water behaves when it comes out of a tube versus when it's drawn into a tube or forced into a tube. Remember what we said about sucking. What happens here, if we think about a close-up of the end of the tube. So we've got the tube there, there's a pressure in here, and there's going to be water coming out. That flow of water will tend to form a very directional jet. And so we will have a jet of water that comes out in a very straight line, and that generates a reaction force. The chamber is pushed this way whilst the water is pushed that way. On the return cycle, when the water is pushed back into the tube, the molecules of water don't all line up here and try and go in a straight line. What actually happens is you get water comes in from all these different directions here, all the way around. In fact, a kind of 3D hemisphere of directions from the end of the tube. And so you've got water being pushed out in a jet, but when it's drawn back in not in a jet, and so there is less reaction force here. So you can imagine if you, that one there, the reaction force obviously goes that way. If we add up all of these forces here, what you end up with actually is a very, very weak reaction force that way. And so as the thing oscillates, it will tend to drive the boat forward because there's this big thrust that comes out in the jet, and then the return path is just drawn in from the end of the tube all around. There's no reaction force really to speak of there. So that, in a nutshell, and that is a vast oversimplification. If you're an expert in fluid dynamics, I'm sure you're probably looking at this and laughing at me right now. That's a really, really oversimplified description of what's actually happening on these boats. There's probably a million things I've missed out that are a lot more interesting and subtle than anything I've mentioned here, but that's just it in a nutshell. That's the simplest possible way to think about how these things are working. So I'd like to actually give a bit of a shout out to Grandad is an Old Man, a channel that I follow called Grandad is an Old Man. He's been actually experimenting with Putt Putt boats himself at the moment, and I've been having a lot of fun watching his experiments with Putt Putt boats, and that's what kind of inspired me to have a go at this. This is a different engine design. I don't think I've seen anybody make an engine design quite like this before. This is one that doesn't require any additional bits of tubing or anything like that. Anyway, check out Grandad is an Old Man. Link in the video description. And thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.